Hello and welcome back to JLXP, episode 34. Week 1 of the LCS is in the books, and if you're watching this, you likely paid attention to LCS on Saturday and Sunday, so I won't go into a huge recap of what happened, but more so I want to dive into some of the top storylines of the week. And something that I was talking about behind the scenes on the desk on Saturday with Emily, Raz, and Dash is we started asking each other if this was the most exciting LCS had ever been. And at least my takeaway from that is through 1 week, yes. And I started asking myself a little bit of why I think that is the case. And there are a couple of things that I'm going to go to detail on in this video. The two big ones are surprisingly actually the Smite, Janna, and Karma top from FlyQuest. And then the second is just going to be Cloud9 and how explosive they are going to continue to be throughout the LCS split. Added those two things onto the bigger just connection of big storylines that happened with everything coming together of like half of the teams who weren't there for lock-in seemingly all arrived at the same time and packed a punch or came up empty like TSM did with their 0-2 start. There's also a couple of things that I'm going to be tracking throughout the entire year. I'm going to be tracking the top 5 versus bottom 5 contest that I laid out in my original LCS Power Rankings video, where 5 of the teams have big budgets and 5 of the teams need to be able to get creative. And then at the end of each of these like weekly recap videos, I'm going to do a way too early MVP ranking. So I have written down my week 1 MVP leaderboard. But first off, I want to talk about Cloud9 because they played Ivern mid, they played Sona support, and then in the next game they played Soraka mid. And by the end of it, it just looked like the game was completely unlosable for them. And there is so much like vindication going on about like this is the right way to play the game, and they were right all along. And I love the excitement and the diversity, but I wanted to go a little deeper on those games in particular because I thought there were definitely breaking points in those games that I think had a large benefit of the uniqueness of the strategy being very unfamiliar for the opponent. They also had 3 days of practice, so the strategy was going to be relatively unfamiliar for the user as well. So I still do give credit to Cloud9 for their awesome week 1 start. But let's think about the original Golden Guardians game where they had Ivern mid, Aphelios bot, Sona support, Gnar top lane, not a particularly tanky team, lots of squishies and lots of sustain. They also had Blabber on Gwen jungle, who in the post-game interview said like we were low-key playing funnel, which I think is very true and something they did in both games. But when Golden Guardians had the early lead, because Pride Stalker's Qiyana had a couple kills, and they had a Qiyana Yuumi, which was possibly going to be able to take over the game, there was this ridiculous fight in River. First off, the dive failed because Pride got Sona ulted on his Qiyana EQ and basically stun-locked himself under the turret without being able to get off his ultimate. Got stun-locked under the turret. And then the Ivern shields and the Sona shields and a misplayed fight by Lost down in the bottom part of the river ended up in this like 4v5 ace from Cloud9. But I don't think those things happen if you're used to accounting for the shields of Ivern and Sona, because like that composition itself from Cloud9 really doesn't have that many tools to run people down. It really, I said on the analyst desk, like it forces the other team to try something hard. But because of the unfamiliarity of Golden Guardians playing against it, I think it was even more beneficial than it would be after a couple of weeks for Cloud9. And that's something I saw in Cloud9's game against EG as well, which was a much closer game for longer. But the fight, if you remember, where Blabber took the first Drake, he spent like 5 to 10 seconds at like 10% health, but it just really looked like EG was not used to playing against a Soraka ult. Because you just don't see it in pro play, like especially from mid at that stage in the game. Because even if it was a Soraka support, the Soraka support would never be level 6 at that Drake timing. But Fudge healed Blabber for so damn much during that fight, it 100% caught EG off guard. And then Fudge even said in the post-game interview, like, they thought EG was better as a team than C9 right now, so playing the Soraka, we might win because they're going to be unfamiliar with it. And Fudge even said Copy plays the Victor side of the Soraka versus Victor matchup better than the way JoJo played it. Fudge isn't saying that Copy is better than JoJo, but he's saying that the familiarity of the matchup benefited Cloud9. So those types of wins, while the surprise factor is like definitely real and something that can be strived for, you can't do it completely consistently. So I really want to see, and obviously everyone does, but how that tracks and how differently teams play against these like sit back and wait for you to do something hard team compositions that Cloud9 has played in the first 2 games of this week. So again, extremely excited to be watching Cloud9 games. I think from draft to the end of Champ Select, the most interesting team in the league, confirmed after week 1. And then the second big thing that I wanted to talk about in this fairly quick video is FlyQuest. They're very surprising 2-0. Although they did do it against 2 of the other teams that would be classified as bottom 5, like the week 1 strength of schedule would definitely be the weakest of the 2-0 teams, and both games were pretty close, but both games were done with Smite top. And what I find interesting about this is they were the only team to do it in the LCS. Normally, and they did it twice. So normally when there's this type of, I'd almost want to call it an abusive strategy in terms of its attempt to almost break the game, like game mechanics, abuse the game in some way. Like literally a top laner just not farming and roaming around the map is not playing League of Legends as it is intended. Either it is patched out very quickly, or you see an explosion of it where 6 teams are going to try and do it, or it just becomes Smite top versus Smite top and they're both roaming around. This was very much like, no, just FlyQuest believed this was good, and just FlyQuest dedicated the practice time to doing it, which is actually good for them. It's actually really good for them, because when I was trying to approach this, I've approached this from a couple sides. Like there was an abusive strategy that happened while I was on the game design team when the Spell Thief 0 CS top laners happened, and talking through like the pros and cons and how much collateral damage can be done by acting on something like this versus how much damage is done by not acting on something like it. And then from a team side, knowing that Riot is likely going to have some type of response at some point, how scared are you to devote practice time, and how much benefit can you glean if you do put in the practice time? And on all of those like really weird diagrams of variables, FlyQuest came out amazingly. I've mixed my analogies, but 2 thumbs up is how they would assess this top lane Smite situation, because just from the team perspective, it is so important that you can identify how good you think it is, but you also need to identify how good other people think it is. Because if everyone thinks it's good, it's going to get fixed by Riot right away. If only you think it's good and it is good, you can get wins out of it. And that's what I think FlyQuest has been able to do. With that being said, I saw a lot of talk about the games being like clown fiestas or sloppy, and I wanted to push back against that like pretty substantially. Of course those games are going to be sloppy. They're fundamentally playing a different game as the aggressor and the defender of this strategy. never do you get practice and break down how to play with a 300 CS advantage over the enemy top laner as he's been 5-man diving your mid and bot laner for the first 15 minutes of the game. It reminded me a lot of lane swapping. And that is a strategy. That was like the original game-breaking strategy that Riot let run for like 2 years before getting rid of it. But that strategy had so many different iterations and evolutions and took years to solve. And now we have like one LCS team and then one ERL team that I know of that have done it. It is in its absolute infancy as a strategy. Now, even FlyQuest, I think, had one draft where I really liked it and one draft where I didn't like it. The draft that I liked it was their comeback win they had against Golden Guardians, where they didn't even have Janna. They had Karma, who I think is a slightly weaker version of the strategy, but still effective in the overall comp that they had. They had Karma top, but then they had a hyper carry in Jinx, and they had a tank or defensive support in Braum. So having that combination of high health, highly durable support in bot lane, and then you have the top lane enchanter support with a hyper, that's what you have to do. I never want to see this with Jhin ever again, because one of the charms of this strategy is that you get to accelerate your own AD carry over the other. The one thing FlyQuest did extremely well in both of their games was they made sure Johnson was way stronger than the other AD carry. And then once you've done that, using your two supports to propel that carry forward is, I think, how you eventually take these strategies to victory. And the other thing that I wanted to talk about with the strategy would be like maybe a prediction of what will happen to it. One, I have no idea. I haven't talked to anyone at Riot about this strategy, but it's really, really hard actually to fix something like this because one, you don't want to overreact to something if it doesn't have a widely adopted, like abusive case. So the sweet spot actually is like, oh, if it's something that like one team can do really well, maybe that's actually very cool. But if it's something that you're seeing every game and it is fundamentally changing the experience you see in a pro game and it is no longer applicable to a solo queue game, then it's not good. And that's when you're likely to see a heavy-handed solution to it. But that's the struggle, is like it's very, very difficult to fix these types of game design things where so many like systems are interacting to make it partially effective that the collateral damage you have on the rest of the game can be very bad. So like when I go back to the 0 CS top lane with the Spell Thieves thing that happened back in, I believe it was 2019, that solution, which was done in haste because we didn't want at the time, and this is just me speaking for me, I don't have a perfect memory of the situation, so this is not like a Riot opinion, but I did not want teams to put a bunch of practice into something only to have that not be viable later on, like what happened with Funnel, where if you remember Funnel, there were a few teams that were really good at it. They put a bunch of practice time into it. Like you had all these junglers learning how to play supports. Some were better at it than others. But then it was like, oh yeah, actually Funnel is just not good for the game. So, and then it's like, well, it was so frustrating for teams because there's this strategy that is good. And if we don't learn this strategy, we are going to lose. And if we do learn this strategy, by the time it is taken out, it is not going to be worth the practice, and we will be punished relative to the teams that didn't adapt at all. So, like, you can see how just ugly and frustrating that is as described. So there is an onus to fix it fast, but that is in conflict with fixing it in an elegant way. So, long story short, these things are exciting in bursts, but really stressful to teams, to Riot, and to players. So take that however you want to take it. But week 1 of LCS was super exciting. The overall record between top 5 and bottom 5 teams was 3 wins for the top 5, 1 win for the bottom 5, that win being Dignitas over TSM. There'll be a really big test for TSM next week as they play against 2 other bottom 5 teams. They're really going to need to pick up some wins because that means the back half of their first round robin is going to be extremely tough. And I will also do a quick bit here on who my week 1 MVP leaderboard consists of. And my number 1 is, I was in slight disagreement with the other casters and analysts in the vote as FBI got player of the week. I thought it should have been Berserker. And it's partially because I can't think of a single mistake he made. Like, I thought he just played one of the most perfect weeks of AD carry that I've seen in the LCS. And as an 18-year-old rookie to the league, that was just incredible to me. But the reason I have him as like my week 1 leader for MVP is if Cloud9 is going to continue to play in a scaling and enchanter heavy style, Berserker is going to be set up for so much success. Like hyper carry with multiple enchanters, oftentimes I think they're going to be in very strong team fighting comps. And if he continues to perform at that level, holy moly, that's going to be impressive. Number 2 for me is FBI. Similar story with 100 Thieves. I thought it was just a hair below what Berserker was doing this week. And then number 3 is River. He was the catalyst in this 2-0 Dignitas week. And if they continue to perform the way they did in Lock-In, and specifically the way he did in week 1, I think he's going to be in that conversation for weeks to come. That is also going to do it for this episode of JLXP. A quick week 1 recap. I can also say that on Thursday morning is about when I'm going to release it. I'm going to be doing a podcast with Emily Rand where we talk about her 10 Thoughts article and use that as a jumping off point for some good conversation. I will probably not release another video in the middle of the week, but if something does come up, I likely will do that. If you want to see that, I would suggest subscribing to either the YouTube, the Spotify, or the Apple Podcast. Those are the 3 platforms I've been releasing this on. Thank you so much for listening to the first 3 episodes so far. I know the YouTube channel has already picked up about 1,500 subscribers since I started this back up again. So really, really happy about that. And I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. It was a bit of a stream of consciousness. I tried to keep it short and as recappy as possible. Let me know if you like these episodes, if you'd like me to bring on guests, or really any type of change or not change that you guys would like to see. So thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you next time.